But Sauron's grasp stretched much further than the lands of Gondor and Rohan alone. And his forces might have done great evil in the north of Middle-earth, had a handful of heroes not stood in his path. Their stories, too, deserve to be told.
The Lord of the Rings War in the North is a 2011 action role-playing hack-and-slash video game developed by Snowblind Studios. I remember when this game came out, being a dumb teenager, I was excited for a Lord of the Rings game with some blood and gore. For some reason, I remember that being a big selling point for the game. I have no idea if that's true, but the game is rated M, one of the few Lord of the Rings games to be rated mature. I remember really enjoying this game back then, but it's a game I never revisited until now. Does Lord of the Rings hold up today? Is it as fun as I remember? Is it worth spending almost $50 on G2A to buy a Steam key? Let's talk about it.
Do the dash now!
Set during the events of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, you'll take control of one of three characters: Eredin, a ranger; Thorin, a dwarf. He's from Erebor, the place from The Hobbit for the uninitiated; and Andriel, an elf. Now, the story begins in Bree, at the Pouncing Pony before Frodo arrives. You'll meet Aragorn and he will give you your first quest, to keep the orcs at Foremoss busy while he takes the hobbits to Rivendell. Throughout the game, you'll meet characters from the films and even a few from the novel. The story of this game was actually based on some of Gandalf's dialogue in the Return of the King novel. Telling you what it said would kind of spoil what happens in the game, so I won't mention the exact dialogue, but I think that's pretty cool. You'll travel around the north of Middle-earth, visiting some familiar locations, and locations that were only ever mentioned before in the books, so it's really great seeing places mentioned in the books fully realized in this game. Now, the actual story is that you're hunting down a servant of Sauron named Agandaur.
You should have fled Middle-earth with the rest of your cowardly kin, while you still had the chance. We flee from nothing, least of all you, lackey of Sauron.
And here's kind of where some of the negatives are going to come up. Most of the characters in this game just aren't very interesting. I wouldn't say they're bad by any means, but they are just serviceable. This game was designed to be a 3-player co-op hack and slash with friends, but that doesn't mean they had to sacrifice any of the playable characters from having any character of their own, besides what race they are and what weapon they use. There are some good characters in the game, and one character that I loved. That would be my boy Belleroam the Eagle. You rescue him early in the game, during the Foremoss quest, and he is pretty interesting and he's extremely helpful. After you rescue him, he will help you out in combat. If you have an eagle feather, you can call Belleroam to come in and help you in any fight. Unless you're fighting a boss, he will almost certainly kill every enemy in one strike. This can be extremely helpful in the many instances where there are a lot of enemies on screen and you need help taking some of the tougher ones out. Belleroam was also the only time in the game I felt emotionally invested in the story and a character. No spoilers, but Belleroam, he said something later in the game that just made me want to go and mess Agandaur up, man. And this game does actually have some side missions. They aren't anything very exciting though. Typically a character will just ask you to find specific objects in a certain level and then bring them back. The main bad guy for this game is Agandaur, and he is just sort of there. I don't think he was a good villain. The voice actor felt like he was doing a generic bad guy on some cartoon.
Do you think you two alone can hope to stop me?
I felt like at a certain point there weren't many stakes in the story, and at the end I was just sort of left sitting there wondering that was it. It didn't really feel like the big finale that you would hope it would. Which is weird because earlier points in the game, like when you see all the orcs marching, it feels pretty significant. There was one really cool antagonist, sorta, not really, and that was the dragon that you come across in the game. This guy was cool and menacing. He isn't in the game very much, but he definitely leaves an impression.
Think me a fool. No one travels in the Grey Mountains without good cause. Do not waste my time with darkness lies.
The gameplay is hack and slash to the very core. You will have almost no change in gameplay whatsoever. You'll be doing this. And this.
Servants of the enemy, beware!
And this. To the very end of the game, with the only different type of combat being the occasional turret section. This is an RPG, so you will level up your character and unlock new abilities and get stronger as the game goes along. There's also a lot of loot in this game, so much that I wonder why they even have vendors in the game. They almost never sell you anything that is better than what you'll find out on a mission. But you will need them to buy more health potions and sell the loot that you've collected. You'll also collect new armor and weapons. Some weapons will have slots that you can put gems in that will give you a special bonus like plus 15 fire damage, for example. I played the entire game as the Ranger. He seemed like the best option for playing alone since I have 0 friends, but that gives me a good insight into the game's AI companions. I thought they were alright. Farron was pretty useless, he would go down all the time, but Andrea was very, very helpful. She would knock out orcs from afar, and nearly every time I was in need of healing, she would just know and drop that healing shield. Super helpful. The combat did start getting very repetitive. I started getting pretty frustrated by the amount of trolls that you had to fight. They aren't difficult to fight at all, it's just a slow process to kill them. They will frequently send a troll and a bunch of orcs at the same time. Each enemy does take a decent amount of hits to take down. There was one section towards the end that had 3 trolls and a small army of orcs and enemies, and that was harder than the final boss battle in the game. You also have a dialogue wheel, like in Mass Effect, but I never got the feeling that any dialogue choices you made had any impact on the story, mainly serving as a choice to decide how much exposition you wanted to receive. And if you are interested in Middle-earth, this game does have a lot of cool information. I'd recommend listening to most of the things people have to say, but I'm also a big fan of Middle-earth and I enjoyed hearing about all these different places and characters. You will visit some really great locations. The graphics in this game still look very good for a game that came out 10 years ago, but this game is also very linear. You will mostly follow one strict path with the occasional caves you can run in to find a chest. One thing I liked is that when you're out in the mountains and it's very snowy, you'll see some cool details on your character, like the armor being a bit frozen. And I love the look of the places that you visit. Starting with Bree, I love how it looks like a typical fantasy town, and when you're up in the mountains, you can have some really great views. It is a genuinely very good looking game. The music in this game is also very good. It's similar to the music in Howard Shore's score for The Lord of the Rings. So as far as music goes, it was really good, and the sounds were all good. Firing an arrow feels satisfying. And when you pull off a final blow, slow-mo decapitation on an orc, it looks, feels, and sounds awesome. What's interesting is that this game is no longer listed. You cannot buy a new copy of this game. Your only options are buying an old copy for the Xbox 360 or PS3, or what I did, and buy a Steam key from a place like G2A. Not a cheap one either, it cost me nearly $50. Was that $50 well spent? Well, yes and no. I really wanted to play a Lord of the Rings game that wasn't Shadow of Mordor. Not that I don't love Shadow of Mordor, but I just finished Batman Arkham Asylum and they are very similar games, gameplay-wise. So I decided on War in the North, a game that I remember really liking, and I even had that super awesome special edition. I've had the map of Middle-earth it came with on my wall since the day I bought it. I honestly think that $50 today is way too expensive for what this game offers. While I still really enjoyed this game, it was a bit frustrating with the repetitive combat, but if you're a big Lord of the Rings fan and want an interesting story set during the events of the trilogy, this is definitely a fun time. It's always great being able to have an adventure in Middle-earth. One last note before I finally end this video, Snowplane Studios developed this game and unfortunately they were defunct a year later in 2012. being merged with Monolith, who would make the Middle-earth Shadow of Mordor games. War in the North was also a commercial failure, a fact that many critics attributed to the timing of its release, being released only 10 days before the juggernaut of fantasy gaming, Skyrim. But I think this is still a really interesting game, and while this game does have its drawbacks, it's still a very fun game that if you can find it for a good price, I would definitely recommend playing it. Do you have a favorite Lord of the Rings game? Let me know down below.
A little rest sounds good.